First up, transgender swimmer Lia Thomas beats the ladies. Many of you will have heard this story about Lia Thomas, the transgender athlete, a biological male and former participant in men's swimming events. Thomas now identifies as and competes in the women's events. This caused quite a bit of sensation just last week when Thomas won the women's 500-yard freestyle national championship, beating 2 Olympic silver medalists and outdoing second-placed Emma Wyant by a significant 1.75 seconds. As a male swimmer, Thomas was ranked 462nd. As a female swimmer, Thomas is ranked number 1. Now, an independent journalist, Savannah Hernandez, spoke with one of the women who was beaten by Thomas, and the swimmer said this. She said, "We're all very disappointed and frustrated that someone who has the capabilities more than us women has been able to compete at this level and take opportunities away from other women. I had a teammate who did not make the finals today because she was just bumped out of the finals. It's heartbreaking to see somebody who went through puberty as a male and has the body of a male to be able to absolutely blow away the competition. You go into it with the mindset that you just don't have a chance. It's hard to compete with the aerobic capacity, the muscle development of a man. Staying positive, I bet, for other swimmers who are in the heat is probably overwhelming." That video went viral on Twitter, and then, of course, what did Twitter do? They have banned Savannah Hernandez. I think the comments are clearly accurate because obviously it's truth that she's speaking, but also there's a photograph doing the rounds of this Lia Thomas standing on the podium and with the 2nd, 3rd and 4th place women gathering on the other side of the podium doing their own celebration as if they're 1st, 2nd and 3rd and having a photo with Thomas excluded on the side, and Thomas towers over them in bulk, in height, in every possible way. And it was interesting at the Tokyo Olympics. I don't reckon this event's going to come up in Los Angeles because it proves something that some people don't want proven. At the Tokyo Olympics, there was this thing called the mixed relays, and they did it in swimming and they did it in running. And man, you just got a sense of the difference between the male athletes and the female athletes. And in the swimming, the commentator was actually saying, because each side gets to choose when the women go and when the men go, and so sometimes there's women and men in the pool at the same time for different teams. And she was just pointing out, she said, just the wake from the men's body mass in the pool and the speed actually threatens to wash the women clean out of their lane. That's just the way that it is. And when you watch the running, you know, even my jaw was on the floor and I was expecting the men to obviously be faster. The difference is just ridiculous, you know? It's huge. And that's what the women show, that's what this lady is pointing out, and she's pointing it out quite rightly. And also Reika Georgi, I think I'm saying that right, is also a former Olympian, and she was the swimmer who would have qualified for the final had Thomas not been in the event. And she wrote to the National Collegiate Athletic Association expressing her disappointment that he was allowed, that Thomas was allowed to compete. And Twitter has since suspended an account in her name. It's unclear at the time of recording whether that banning was actually because of the letter that Reika wrote, or whether it was because the account didn't belong to Reika. It's just all unclear, I don't know. But nonetheless, that has happened. What are we to make of all of this? Well, first of all, I don't think this is a time to melt into a puddle of sympathy, compassion and nuance. I do have a lot of sympathy for people, but there are limits. There really are. And I just want to say Lia Thomas is a jerk, to put it mildly. You know, I could say it stronger than that. Any right-thinking man with any sense of decency must have that sense looking on at this, as I'm sure the women do. And here's why I say that. It's one thing when a person is struggling in themselves, and maybe there's mental struggle, maybe there's an identity struggle, maybe there's some complicated history to it, and that does require sympathy. And my sympathy is with Thomas on that score. I'm sure somebody who goes through gender dysphoria genuinely is not having a pleasant experience for a lot of the time. But it's another thing altogether when a person starts to act out in such a way that they inflict injustice on other people. They are responsible for that. And that always requires condemnation. It requires calling out. It doesn't take sympathy in this case. Let me explain. Generally speaking, in the world at large, when a biological man takes advantage of women or causes injustice for women, we condemn him. His past and his struggles, they don't get him off the hook because he is a morally responsible human, as we all are. And we give that up at our peril. We must maintain the fact that we are morally responsible humans, regardless of creed, regardless of identity or anything else. And a biological male who takes advantage of women or causes injustice for women, well, we condemn him for that reason because we know that that is true. This situation surely is no different. Nobody gets a leave pass because of their identity to do the wrong thing. Beating the girls on their own turf is inglorious, it is shameful, it deserves condemnation, no matter how hard the culture resists that condemnation. There is a reason, for the scriptural command to quote, and I'm quoting, show honour to the woman as the weaker vessel. Some people have hated that statement over time, but you know what? Looking at Lia Thomas on that podium, suddenly you realise that perhaps God, who authored the truth about biology and sex and has shown us how to respect it, knew what he was talking about when he wrote that. And the man who transgresses that limit is doing a grave wrong, and it needs to be called out. I don't care what his identity is. It needs to be called out. And just on that, it's important to pick that up. And I want to make a point more broadly about the thinking behind this. It is so important to emphasise and uphold the truth of God as creator, to guard against this stuff. Sometimes I think we suppose that the only truth that Christians need to tell to the world is that God is Redeemer, as if the gospel, the word that talks about the good news of Jesus Christ, as if it's a neat little box and that's the only message we're meant to convey, God Redeemer in Christ. It's really important to note that the Apostle Paul never narrowed the gospel like that. He wrote Romans, which is a book that is all about the gospel from start to finish. He says so when he opens the book. And he started with the truth that God is creator. If he isn't the creator, he can't be the Redeemer because there's nothing to redeem. He created the world fell in sin, he redeems the world through Jesus Christ. There's no disconnection between any of those points. And we've tried to disconnect them, I fear, at times in the past, at great current cost, where creation is really one of the great problems in our time, in our culture. If he isn't the creator, furthermore, then what in the world is the problem? If he didn't create this paradigm that we're living in, define what is right and wrong, define what is morality, define truth, define good and evil, then what even is sin? What even is evil that we need salvation from it? That's why God connected the two concepts when he spoke to the Israelites. He said, for your creator, he is your Redeemer. You can't have one and not the other. And our world has said, rather, that there is no creator higher than me, yours truly. And that is the beginning of their trouble. That is what happens when you don't believe that God is great, that he made us, and that he set the world according to its principles, its laws, its standards, and its direction. What happens is you get too big for your boots. You start in your foolishness to compete with God for some of his jobs, and you say, I'm the creator now, somewhere in your heart. And you define right and wrong. You hear it all the time. Well, it was right for me or wrong for me. Well, right for me is called my opinion. It's not what's right. Neither is it what's wrong. God is in charge of those things, not me. I'm not the creator now. He's always been the creator. You also live your life on your own terms, with your own self-set goals and ambitions, because you don't really believe that God has set the direction of history and that he's ordained things and that he's ordained things for you to do. You don't believe that. You don't believe he's in charge. He's in control. You think it's all in your hands, with your free will, with nothing else to consider. Well, the Apostle James says, all such boasting is sin about what you're going to do with your life, where you're going to go with your life. He says, you need to start with the premise, if the Lord wills it. I could go on. Surely, though, the grossest example in our modern day is to declare yourself to be the opposite sex. Surely that is getting too big for your boots. Surely that is taking on God's job. When every cell in your body contains a certain chromosomal configuration, every cell in your body, when your build, your internal organs, your aerobic capacity, as that swimmer said, your psychology, everything about you has developed based on a male and female blueprint that goes right down to your DNA. Oh, but apparently by just chopping ourselves up, we can change all of that. Well, here's the thing. No, you can't, because you're not the creator. God is. Genesis 1:26, then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and he said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. I had coffee once with a very liberal theologian, and she explained to me that this may be the case, but that God also created sea and dry land, and that he created light and dark. And, you have seashore where the two things blend and become indistinct, or you have dusk or dawn where the two things blend and become indistinct. So it's the same with male and female. You can have the blending. But of course, it's a bogus point. First of all, God didn't make the dark. It doesn't say that, but that's another point. Let's pretend let's pretend that's not an issue. Either way, at the seashore, what do you have? Well, you stand in the water right up to your waist. You're standing on the land, and the water's covering your waist. It's still two distinct things, the land and the sea. Full stop. The two things have not changed in their intrinsic and essential nature at all. They haven't blended. They're just sitting next to each other. And similarly, light and darkness. Well, you know, you look in the dusk, what do you have? You actually just have less light. The light hasn't changed. The dark hasn't changed. You look at the sunset, you're looking at the source of light. It hasn't changed. Same thing, when God made male and female, he doesn't anticipate that they change. He has made two distinct categories. And what we do in our mind and what we do when we get too big for our boots and say, I'm the creator now, cannot and does not change that any more than declaring the land to be the sea could change anything. It's a bogus point. The whole of Genesis 2 and 3 are actually quite preoccupied with making the point that God deliberately made a man and a woman, and he had different purposes in mind when he did that. And the rest of Scripture continues to reinforce it. And here's one of the many things that we're told, and I mentioned it before, let me come back to it to reinforce it. There's a command in the New Testament to men. It says to, quote, show honour to the woman as the weaker vessel, unquote. And a lot of people have hated that over the years, and the feminists haven't been keen on it. But suddenly, as I looked at the images of Thomas towering over the girls on the gold medal spot on the podium, as I thought, well, what if I or someone else did the same thing? It would be the same. If I was a transgender rower, you know, there would be me, a foot taller than the nearest woman, probably. You realise all of a sudden that God knew what he was talking about when he said that. Because he's the creator. He's the author of truth about biology, about sex. And he's shown us, therefore, how to respect it. And the man who transgresses that limit is doing a very grave wrong, and it needs to be called out. And that's why I speak harshly on this aspect of what Lia Thomas has done and what Lia Thomas's enablers have permitted to be done, not least of which is the NCAA, the governing body of that competition.